So today's video is about how we address what is blocking us from achieving our desired reality. In a past video, we talked about how in order to shift into that desired reality, we have to look at the existing programming that we're running on and switch that programming to align with our desired reality. So some of you may be on that journey right now and have already looked at your programming, shifted it appropriately, but you're still feeling resistance. Like, why is this happening? I know what I want. I'm trying to act in accordance with this new desired reality, but something is holding me back. And that's what we're talking about today. If you recall, in prior videos, I talked about attachments and how attachments are the root of all suffering. And that is what often leads to us being in a non-desired reality. So to shift into our desired reality, oftentimes what could be holding us back, creating that resistance, is attachments. So we need to manage those attachments. In a prior video, I talked about how what we want to strive for is connections rather than attachments. But of course, we have attachments, and we're going to talk about that right now, because thinking that we don't have attachments or it's easy to get over an attachment is absolutely not possible. And a main reason we have attachments relates to our basic human needs. So I would like to introduce to you the concept of the wheel of needs. This is something I developed a couple of years ago for myself as I was looking at my life and trying to find some good understanding and balance as far as what was going on and where I needed to adjust. As human beings, we all have basic human needs. And when these needs aren't met, issues arise. And when there's not balance in achieving our needs, issues arise, including attachments. So let's talk about these needs. I've structured this wheel of needs kind of in 3 chunks, looking at more of the physical, emotional, spiritual, if you will, realms. So the 3 different areas here. When we look at physical, again, I've just listed out some of these. There's plenty of other ones, and you'll want to do this for yourself. You'll want to create your own wheel of needs. And I actually did this with my friend when we did this several years back, and he all geeked out and created an Excel spreadsheet and everything. But create your own, because you're going to have different needs. There's going to be the basic ones, but you will have other needs that arise specific to you. So again, when we're looking more at the physical realm, food, water, touch cannot be underestimated. If any of you are aware, there are plenty of studies out there about what happens to animals and human beings when there is no touch. And I believe most recently there's a lot been going around and talk about touch starvation. And really this is no laughing matter. People, and they've even shown babies, can get very ill and even die if they're not given appropriate touch. If they're just fed and given the basic food and water, but not touched, that is just so detrimental to our human growth that it can even lead to death. So never underestimate the need for human touch. I included sexual here, and we're going to get back on this. Again, remember, this is going to be specific to your own needs. Some people might have a higher sexual need than others do. It's something you need to be aware of as we talk about this and we see how these particular areas can become problematic or need to be better balanced. Over here in the green is more of the emotional needs we all have for love, to feel connected, for that sense of belonging. Again, highly, really needed need. And in some cultures and families, it's really not recognized. You get the statements of, I put a house over your head and give you your food, and there's no emotional needs being met. And that, of course, can create a lot of issues that can follow you up into adulthood. So recognizing emotional needs are basic human needs, non-negotiables. If you do not meet your basic human needs for emotional support and that feeling of overall well-being, you will have issues. And then down here, again, more if you want to call it spiritual or other beyond just the emotional or the physical, things like having a sense of purpose, feeling fulfilled within life. That's another whole section. And again, for some people, this might be a higher need than some of the other needs. It's all about figuring out what aligns with you and then making sure that there's good balance in being able to meet those needs. So understanding your wheel of needs, when we want to talk about attachment and managing attachment so that you're able to propel into that desired reality, meeting your needs, but not being held back by the attachments. So what can happen is, first, let's recognize that out of these needs, again, these are sample needs, but some of them will apply to pretty much everybody, like food. They can be multi-source or single source met. And what I mean by that is food. There's a myriad of different types of food out there. You can meet that need for food in a ton of different ways. Now, let's just go to the sexual. Sexual, especially in the culture we live in, is usually single source. And this is part of what makes it very difficult not to become attached to a romantic partner. Because most of the time, you're choosing to be sexual beyond yourself, of course. You're choosing to be sexual with that other person. And that, of course, creates some sort of relationship there where your need is being met by a single source. And that can create more of that attachment and hence fear of maybe losing that person. Now, of course, there are other types of relationships, polyamory, open relationships, where maybe it's not a single source. But for most people in our culture, it is one person who you are meeting sexual needs with, and you're managing that throughout the relationship. So this is something that needs to have a bit of attunement. So when you're getting maybe down on yourself about why am I so attached on this one person? And why I know I need to work on attachments, but with my significant other, my partner, I'm very attached. Well, that's normal. It really is. It's just knowing how to manage it. And part of what that goes into is, not having one person meeting all the needs, which we'll get into. So understanding multi-source versus single source, and when you can multi-source, take advantage of that. If you can meet your need for connection with multiple different people, maybe through your job even, friends, family, make sure you're spreading that out so you're not getting overly attached to one person or one job or whatever it might be. And if it is single source, paying special attention to make sure that you manage it in a way that if it were to be gone, understanding there's not an easy replacement, that you're going to know how to manage it, and also just recognizing it's going to be harder. It is going to be harder to deal with that loss than it would something that is multi-source. So another way this can go awry is when you have an overfocus on one of your needs. So this is where you're getting more fixated, and of course this is where you do get attached. And like, for example, some people get overly attached to food and it becomes, in a way, an addiction for them. Or overly attached to a sexual need that drives how they live their life every single day, revolving around meeting that sexual need. So trying to the best of your ability not to overfocus on one. And I'll refer to this probably a few times, but again, we're looking at this as a wheel. Think of it literally like a wheel on a vehicle. If it is not fully balanced, you're going to have clunkiness, right? If you especially are very attached in one of these prongs, if you will, one of these areas coming out, spokes, I guess you would call it, that might bump out more. That might start swelling out. And then what happens is you're trying to roll and you're no longer balanced, you get stuck. And if you recall from prior videos about the stuck cycle in the Rand realms, that's what happened. You get stuck because you have an attachment, you have something that pushed out and over-relied in one specific area. Let's use the sexual, where now, because that's such a focus and such an attachment for you, it's bumping out over here, and now you're stuck and you're not able to roll and have a good balance in your life. Next one, which I was alluding to before, is when you have one person or thing, usually it's a person, that is really meeting too many of your needs, or you're relying on them to meet too many of your needs. You want them, maybe they're the primary care, like the giver in the breadwinner, whatever you want to say, in the house. So they're providing actually the food and water and shelter, but you're relying on them for that love, the connection, the belonging, the touch, the sexual. Sometimes it even goes to purpose and fulfillment. You're putting seriously all your eggs in one basket of this person. And can you imagine if you lose that person, everything's just going to fly off, right? There's going to be no balance. You're not going to have a wheel. And this is how, when you hear people say, oh my God, I totally lost myself in the relationship. Because you've become so focused in revolving that wheel and getting all your needs met by one person. You might have been getting your needs met, well, you most likely were, by other things or people before. Friends, a job, things you like to do for fulfillment or purpose, like a hobby or a sport or something. Then all of a sudden you're so focused on getting all of that from somebody else that you drop some of these other of the multi-source. And you start basically single sourcing all your needs from one person. And that is definitely setting yourself up for some serious suffering upon that loss. So again, being able to understand that and start managing it better so you're not relying so much on one person to meet so many of your needs. And then also what can happen if you're not meeting some of your needs is you think, well, I'm just going to create something else that I feel is like going to meet this feeling I have. And oftentimes that is something that becomes an addiction. So it could be a substance or behavior that really is definitely not a basic human need, but is not a need. If you have an addiction to a particular drug that you do not need it from a physical standpoint, it's not medically prescribed to treat some sort of disease or illness, and you start using/abusing that particular substance, you're basically creating something here. You're creating a whole nother spoke or area. And then what happens with this, again, because it's not an essential need at all, it starts messing up the rest of what really truly is a need, and sometimes just takes right over. I mean, if you've known some true addicts, they start not even fulfilling their basic needs for food and water. It gets that bad, right? Where all they are doing is focusing on what they believe is going to fill what they need when it's truly not a need. And if they do this exercise, they would realize, wow, I put this here because I'm so starved of maybe love, connection, belonging, touch. I don't know what my purpose is. I'm just so detached. I don't know anymore. I don't feel fulfilled, that they create this here. And then again, it starts arching out like we talked about, and it creates this bump, and then they get stuck. And the only thing is they're just stuck here, as we call it in Rand realms. They're stuck in the aid, the addiction, the dependence, that cycle. They're stuck there. So if this happens to be going on with you, look at where am I not meeting some of these other basic needs? That's what I need to reprogram. Don't focus on this so much. Don't focus on how do I not do this? How do I not? We talked about that before. Don't focus on the behavior, which is the effect. Focus on the cause. And the causes is not having some of these other needs met. And once those needs are met, you will see that this will disappear. So, okay, we talked about how we need to manage these attachments to be able to push forward through that resistance and achieve our desired reality. And backing it up, where do these attachments come from? Not having a balanced wheel. So essentially, when we think about what these issues are here, we just discussed what we want to make sure, and the key is one, of course, understanding what our needs are and assuring balance. Making sure we're not overly relying in one area, overly relying on one person or thing to meet so many needs. Making sure that there's overall balance. We don't have some sort of creeper in here that we've inserted and are telling ourselves is meeting a need, when in reality, it's just disrupting the whole wheel because we weren't addressing some other need. And lastly, what I would like to bring in is alignment. So this makes me think of when you have a car taken in and you have its tires balanced and aligned, right? So we just talked about wheel of needs. You got to balance those needs, but you also have to ensure alignment, because if what these needs are still related to your old programming, then you're only just going to keep repeating and being on that same track with that same wheel and living that same life. So it's assuring that you're really looking at what those needs are and that they align with your desired reality, and then that you have balance. So I actually, in my book, call it align. You want to make sure you're balanced and aligned. You want to align. And if you look at this and you do this exercise anytime you're feeling that you're not living in your desired reality, you have to say, okay, you know what? I need to look at my alignment. I got to see what's going on here. What are my needs? What's not being met? Where maybe am I overlying? Where is there an imbalance? Did I let a creeper come in? Come back to it, look at it, adjust, make sure everything's balanced and aligned so you can have a steady, smooth ride into your desired reality, and you can stay that way. Again, just like a car. You're gonna need to have it taken in every once in a while to make sure everything's balanced and aligned. So make it a practice. I mean, especially if you're feeling an issue, revisit. But even if you just want to make it a practice every 6 months or so, just like you would look at the Rand realms and understand where you are, what realm you're living in a certain aspect of your life, you want to look at your overall balance and alignment, just like you would with your car. And with that, you'll be able to make sure that you keep things on track to stay in your desired reality.